Welcome back to Masaryk University's Language Centre's ICT interview series, where we talk to language teachers about their ICT usage. At the moment, we're focusing on online pedagogy and how to redesign face-to-face courses to take advantage of advances in online tools, learning management systems, and distance learning techniques. Today we're talking to Chris Williams from Masaryk University's Language Centre about group cohesion, how to design group cohesion into our courses, and why bother? I mean, isn't it just extra work for the teacher? We also talk about lessons learnt along the way and how to recover from non-cohesive groups. And lastly, we talk about what sort of numbers might work best. So, welcome to the show, Chris.
Our first question, who are you and which unit are you teaching? What kind of subjects are you teaching? And anything about converting those face-to-face kind of subject classes into online? How did that go?
Sure. Okay. My name is Chris Williams, and I'm an English teacher at the Language Centre of Masaryk University in Brno. Most of the courses I teach are English language courses for students preparing to become school teachers or to work in social education. And today we're going to talk a lot about taking these traditional face-to-face classes and trying to run with them in a distance and online environment. And we'll also think about some of the lessons we've learned along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. We're talking about online, of course, but more specifically about group work and cohesion in the groups online. So, first question, what's this cohesion about?
Well, this is the idea of bringing people together. So not just being part of a team of people and doing your own part independently, but the idea of actual interaction and collaboration. And this is important for a few reasons. They need to learn how to work as part of a team for their future jobs. It's certainly also useful for them in other subjects that they're studying at university. But also it's important for them to practice this idea of teamwork and group work in English. I mean, that there are certainly useful phrases and skills that they'll be learning as they negotiate, delegate, and collaborate to produce something.
Sure. So, yeah, what does that involve? In the online world, especially, because that's where we are at the moment, how can we bring in better group cohesion into our group work?
I think one way of doing this is giving a certain degree of control over task direction to the students. This actually gives them some degree of movement and actually something to talk about as decisions are made as to how to proceed or complete the task or project that they've been given. In perhaps a more traditional teacher-centered approach, a task might be set down. There's not really much room for negotiation or independent input there. And so it's very easy in this sort of activity for a student to do their bit and just plug it into the group project. However, with a well-designed or carefully designed task that gives some degree of autonomy and freedom, that there's more opportunity, and in fact that it's necessary that the students will communicate with each other to complete the activity that was set.
Mm-hmm. Why bother with this so much? We've got so much to think about already. Actually putting in collaboration and group work into our courses. Is it much extra work? And is there faster, more efficient ways to try to get good cohesion?
Sure. I think I'll tackle both of those questions as they're both very relevant and I think something that can be easily glossed over. So if we think about why we want cohesion, first of all, well, apart from the language reasons we spoke about there, apart from the skills they'll be developing for their studies and professional life, in this COVID-verse and these quarantine times, it's very easy to feel some degree of disconnect, especially if everything you're doing is sat behind a computer screen. These feelings of isolation can easily increase. And this was a comment made by several students over the last semester, their first experience of this. So there's the mental health aspects as well as building a community to consider here by including these cohesive tasks, by making sure that people are communicating with each other. Perhaps it's not as ideal as being face-to-face, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. This way we can check that people aren't being left alone and that there is some interaction happening, even if it is only in the context of an English language activity. To move on to the next point about does it take much work for us to do? Arguably, I think it means there's less work on part of the teacher. If we consider an activity like preparing for a presentation, the teacher can give the conditions of the presentation in terms of length, what they want the speakers to do, or the sort of information to appear. This group of students will then be free to go off and research something that is of interest to them. Now, that's just a very simple example and one I'm sure many teachers are already doing, but it's the same sort of concept that can carry over into other activities. The teacher will set the framework of what is expected and required, and it can be up to the students then to use the resources at their fingertips then to find suitable materials, to find suitable examples that they can use to complete their activity or presentation in this case.
Which sounds good because it's also incorporating some of the 21st century skills of giving them choice, and research ability can activate their critical thinking, can activate their collaboration because they're in groups.
Absolutely,
nice. Our big question, how to design it into courses, how to design that into tasks that maybe already exist as a sort of a group option?
I think an important part here is having clear guidelines and instructions for the students to follow. Traditionally, the teacher would have been in class to answer or deal with any questions or queries as they come up. However, in this world, responses won't be so instant. And again, the student perhaps might be a bit hesitant to write an email to their teacher or even to their classmates. So I think having very clear guidelines on what is expected of them and also how to go about doing it can really go a long way to help students feel comfortable and more confident in producing this sort of activity.
Say a group activity already exists and it's just sort of group work. Here's your worksheet to work from, do it in groups and present something. How can we build in more group cohesion functionality into that?
Again, the idea of giving the individual student time to think about what they're going to do before they move to a more group or collaborative stage. It's not an unusual event in many, many different classrooms. The idea that in a group there will be those more capable or stronger students, and you'll have those who are more hesitant or reluctant to take part, and generally they will sit back and need a bit more encouragement either from the teacher or their group mates to pull their socks up or to take part in the activity. In this sort of asynchronous times or in these distance learning times as well, I think if an individual student has some time to develop their own ideas and to consider what they would bring to the group before moving on to the more collaborative stage, I think that can really help build a full team effort. So when teachers are preparing their activities and instructions, it should begin with some element of individual thinking, individual research or individual questions that they should answer and have a clear idea about before they can work together.
So this group cohesion and, building it into the group work and things sounds fantastic. Has it worked every time? Are there any it's a digging question, isn't it? Are there any lessons that we've learned over time and tweaks that we've had to make or things like that, or things to consider?
Yes, there are lessons learned, and just the blunt answer to your first question is no. It hasn't worked every time by any means. One attempt at building group cohesion was not on a specific task, but just to try and get the sense of community within a class of students. And one concept I tried with one group, again, something I've seen done elsewhere, is having an off-topic space or sort of like a cafe space, a general space, an open forum where students can talk about things not connected with work, the idea that it will be an area for them to let off steam and just talk to each other. It's not going to be strictly monitored by the teacher. It's not going to be checked for grammar or language or what have you. Purely a space just to unload or talk about something in English. I tried this myself with a fairly small group of 9 students, only it didn't go as I had expected. It being a very small group, they had not only their English lessons together, but also their subject lessons together as well. So they spent a lot of time together and interacting with each other. I think this was one of the reasons why my idea for this English space didn't really work too well, was that they spent so much time with each other. They already knew everything about each other, and a lot of that was already being done in Czech. So moving it into English, it was starting to come across as being a bit forced. It didn't seem to be a real interaction. Further to that, it also turned out there was a bit of a split within the group. Maybe the pressures of having to work so intensively together over an academic year, I'm not sure. But it was made apparent to me that they didn't really like having to interact with each other that much. The group was very clearly split into 2 cliques, I suppose. And it was hard work to try and get these students to cross the clique divide. It was quite hard work indeed. So it just goes to show, the idea can be there, but depending on the group of students you have, on the dynamics between them, these things aren't always going to work as you intend.
It's not all rainbows and unicorns.
No.
How did you get over that? How did you at least mitigate damage and get them to cohese, at least in their little clique groups, perhaps?
That was easier to do, as they were more willing to respond to that. The issue that I never really overcame with them, and again, I think this leads back to making objectives and motivations clear for all these different activities, is that they just saw it as a pointless exercise. They saw it as just another task that needs to be completed, where it wasn't. This was meant to be a space for them to practice their general English use, as well as building a group community. Fundamentally, they should have been using English that was not topic related as just a way of continuing and keeping their hand in their general language skills. However, they just saw it as a waste of their time, that they had so many other things to be doing, that this was just an unnecessary extra that they had to complete. And though they did start to respond to each other in some degree, there wasn't a real conversation there. They were just token question answer responses. I think another thing I learned from this was the involvement of the teacher, certainly in these sort of free space, general English, safe zones, I suppose, is that if the teacher gets involved too soon, that can put off other students from taking part, as they see the teacher is here now. I either don't have to do anything, or the teacher is here now. Now I don't feel as though I can speak so freely because I know it's being monitored closely. So though I think it's fine for a teacher to interact in these spaces, I mean, teachers are humans too. I think it's safer for the teacher to sort of step back a bit and let a forum chain conversation sort of grow before a teacher will add their own comments into it. Let the students feel they've got somewhere to go.
Which I guess can be almost like a nervous reaction on the teacher's part, so to speak, because like it's online, I should be interacting, I should be involved in everything, but actually not necessarily. It's similar to a classroom environment where, as long as you set up the instructions, but also from your lesson learnt, setting up the objectives so they know exactly what they're meant to be practicing here and why it's good for their overall learning of the language. So clear objectives as to why we're doing this activity, and then clear instructions on how to do it, and then let them run with it until they sort of run off track, perhaps.
Exactly. and then the teacher's the shepherd to sort of herd the flock
them back
together
a bit,
again. Exactly. Step off the edge of the cliff,
but not jumping in
onto
too
the right
early.
side. Exactly. As well with these things, again, back on the clarity of the initial instructions and the reasons why for things, is we know how reluctant students can be to ask questions if they don't understand in a face-to-face lesson. And often the teacher can tell there's some misunderstanding through the expression on the face or through the murmuring that might take place in students' native language. And we miss that through distance learning. From another course, I have learned that the student won't email, and the lack of confidence in what needs to be done will just sort of spread and grow. And then eventually someone will be nominated from a group to send an email to the teacher. And all of this could have been dealt with much, much sooner if either they were brave enough to ask the teacher or if the instructions were clear enough from the very beginning. So clarity of instruction is very, very important, and also stressing the openness and approachability. We will respond to their emails in a reasonable amount of time, and you can speak to us still indeed. Yeah, so
we
all
are
of these
actually
will
human.
we are, and we are there. Yes.
Nice. So you mentioned about the cafe and free speech, and the cafe being like a forum board of free speech. You know, anything goes. It's not necessarily topic related. And I think you said something about free to have let their hair down.
Yeah. Well, this sort of activity would happen naturally in a lesson anyway. At the beginning of the lesson, normally I would start with some sort of general conversation, the idea being to warm up the English brain before we dive in. But it's also a chance for them to talk about their own interests and things that are on their minds as well. It's good for the teachers, I think, to see these happening, whether they're interacting or not, because it reminds you that the students are people too, and you might discover you have more in common with some of them than you might have initially thought. Also, you might learn things about them that you won't get to find out through their course or their course-specific activities. And the same goes for the students themselves. Between themselves, they may find connections between people that they wouldn't have been able to without this sort of space to interact.
One last question about group cohesion. If you've got several classes up to, I think, 80 odd students, all taking the same course, all under you, and in the online world, you're free to mix that however you like. Do you have any guidelines? Should we mix that whole group as one? Or should we let them interact between different seminars? Or should we really stick to that seminar being that seminar and only little groups within that seminar, much more insular?
I think there are several ways to view that, really. On the one hand, having an 80 block will be fascinating to work with, especially as they're all doing the same sort of thing. However, it's so easy then for so many voices to get lost amongst the crowd. And I think it could be seen as a bit, or the students might see it as a bit intimidating, as in they don't want to stick their head above the parapet. There's so many other people are going to see me here if I do something wrong or if I look a bit silly. So for those reasons, it can be a bit intimidating. One thing I'll be trying out, and I think we will be trying out as well to some degree, is the idea of having students complete activities within set smaller groups. These activities then, depending on what the activity is, might be viewable to other students in their class group or across the board, across every student taking that course, again, depending on the type of activity and the requirements of the teacher, and maybe even the desires of the students themselves. So I think it's fine to refer to the group as a whole, as a mass body of 80. This is fine occasionally. However, I think we will get more out of the students if they are working within smaller groups. There's nowhere for them to hide in this way. They will build up some solidarity perhaps, or community within their smaller group. They'll feel more confident as they will get to understand the strengths and weaknesses of their group. And yeah, I don't think they'll feel so alone. Knowing that they've got this smaller group to work within will give them strength and confidence to start posting things and interacting online, I think.
Nice. And that isolation is very, or taking away that isolation and getting that connection in. I'm definitely going to do a fair few of my courses into smaller groups of about 4 or so.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks very much for your time today and talking all about group work and group cohesion.
Sure. And good luck with the coming semester.
Thanks so much to Chris for talking to us about group cohesion, or that coming together in a community or team that might be best done in smaller groups with clear objectives and instructions. We talked about giving a framework rather than materials, which would allow for student autonomy or control over their own work, which can actually help build group cohesion. And remember to build in individual thinking time or individual research time. We also talked about how it is actually less teacher time, which is good news for us all, I'm sure. And why not have a cafe or a coffee shop inside your course for free chat, which is unrelated to the course? Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again next time.